All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, we're tackling a big one, and I mean really big, the world of international organizations. Specifically, we're looking at a role that I think has a certain, mystique to it. Secretary General.
Yeah, it's one of those titles, everyone's heard it, but I bet not everyone could tell you exactly what it entails.
Exactly, it sounds important, right? But what does a Secretary General actually do all day?
Well, first we got to clear up a common misconception. People hear secretary, they think, oh, administrative work,
Right,
like someone who's just taking notes in high-level meetings.
right, like the note taker for like the UN General Assembly or something.
Exactly. But the reality is, being a secretary general is about leadership. And not just any leadership, but leadership on a global scale. We're talking about steering entire organizations like the UN, the WHO, places where even small decisions can have huge ripple effects.
It's more like conducting an orchestra, right, with a million different instruments all playing together.
That's a great way to put it. And just like each instrument has a unique role, every secretary general's job is shaped by the specific organization.
So, like, a secretary general at the UN might be dealing with, I don't know, a potential international conflict.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
While over the WHO, it's global health crises, pandemics, things like that. But no matter the focus, you're not just managing the day-to-day, you're setting the entire strategic direction.
Wow. So you're talking about building relationships with world leaders, securing funding, all while being the public face of the organization. That's a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. And that's where this role catcher material you've shared is so interesting. It really highlights all these different facets of the job. Like you've got to supervise staff, shape policies, navigate the complexities of international diplomacy.
Yeah, it makes you think about someone like Kofi Annan during his time as UN Secretary General, especially with something as horrific as the Rwandan genocide happening. Talk about a high-pressure situation.
Exactly. And it's not always about crisis management either. Think about the diplomacy needed to, say, negotiate a climate agreement.
Right.
You've got hundreds of countries, each with their own priorities, and the Secretary General has to find a way to bring them together.
It's like a constant balancing act, trying to keep everyone happy or at least, on board. And from what I'm seeing here in this work environment section, it's not all fancy conferences and state dinners either.
Right. Forget the corner office. We're talking about potentially working in conflict zones, disaster areas, places most people wouldn't go near.
So you need that leadership, that diplomacy, but also a heavy dose of like resilience.
Absolutely. A Secretary General has to be adaptable, able to navigate incredibly complex situations, and always, always dedicated to international cooperation.
So resilience, adaptability, a knack for international relations. We've painted quite the picture here. But let's get down to brass tacks. What are the actual skills you need to, pull this off? What does it take to be a Secretary General?
Well, luckily, this role catcher material you dug up, it's got this section, functions and core abilities. And let me tell you, it is eye-opening.
Oh, yeah. Like surprisingly demanding, more than you'd expect.
Oh, absolutely. We always hear about leadership, but this breaks it down. All these different skills, it's a lot.
It's like the ultimate checklist for, succeeding in international relations. I'm seeing strategic planning, financial management, even something called social perceptiveness. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
And that's what's so interesting about this job, right? You need that big picture thinking, the ability to anticipate global trends, develop long-term plans, but then you also need people skills.
Right, because you're not just coming up with plans, you're convincing people to actually get on board with them.
Exactly. You need to build consensus, bridge cultural divides, get world leaders to actually agree on things. And that's no easy feat.
No kidding. It reminds me of like the Paris Agreement negotiations. Getting that many countries to agree on climate action, that must have taken some serious persuasion.
For sure. And it's not like just standing up on a stage and, making demands. It's a lot more nuanced.
So how does it actually work? How does a Secretary General really exert influence?
Think about someone like Ban Ki-moon, right? During his time as UN Secretary General, he was known for his quiet diplomacy.
Quiet diplomacy. So not exactly the loudest voice in the room.
Exactly. He wasn't always in the spotlight, but he was a master at building relationships one-on-one with these world leaders, finding common ground, gently nudging them towards agreement.
So it's not just about knowing the right protocol or giving a good speech. It's about actually connecting with people.
100%. Active listening, empathy, being able to see things from different perspectives, those are all crucial.
Fascinating. So you're telling me that social perceptiveness thing we saw, it's actually really important.
Absolutely. You got to be able to read the room, pick up on those unspoken dynamics, and adapt your approach. Because remember, you're dealing with a huge range of cultural norms, political viewpoints. It's complex.
That's a lot to juggle. This role catcher guide also mentions emotional intelligence. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Exactly. You can be the most knowledgeable person on the planet, but without that human touch, your impact is going to be limited.
Okay. Emotional intelligence, quiet diplomacy, I'm getting it. But realistically, how does someone even get started on this kind of career path? It's not like you just graduate and boom, you're the UN Secretary General.
Yeah, no kidding. But that's what I like about this role catcher material. It actually lays out a pretty clear progression.
You're talking about that career stages section, right? It is kind of reassuring to see how they break it down.
Exactly. Like the starting point. You might find yourself as a junior administrator, right? Working within a specific department, maybe at a larger organization.
Okay, so you're not like leading peace talks right out of the gate.
Right. But think about the skills you'd be developing. Drafting reports, coordinating meetings, managing logistics, those are all transferable.
Oh, I see. So you're learning the ropes, building those foundational skills, but in the context of an international organization.
Exactly. And as you gain experience, you take on more responsibility. I thought it was so interesting. They have these example tasks, right? Comparing a junior administrator to a deputy secretary general.
Oh, yeah. What was it? Like making copies versus, I don't know, briefing the Security Council.
Well, not quite that dramatic, but you get the idea. At the entry level, maybe you're compiling research for a policy report. But a few steps up the ladder, you're presenting that policy to a room full of diplomats.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty stark contrast. So you're going from like the nitty-gritty to the big picture.
And all along the way, you're honing those leadership abilities, that strategic thinking. It actually makes me think about something else they mentioned, this whole idea of continuous learning.
Which, in a field like international relations, I imagine things change pretty quickly.
Constantly. And it's not always about, like, formal education. It's the experience itself. Working in diplomacy, international development, human rights, all of that feeds in.
So even if someone listening isn't, aiming for Secretary General, these skills we've been talking about, that leadership, communication, cultural sensitivity, those are valuable, period.
Absolutely. The world needs good leaders at every level. And honestly, I think platforms like RoleCatcher, with their tools and resources, that can be a game changer for people.
Yeah, it's like having a roadmap, A&D, a toolkit, all in one place.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground today, from the really heavy responsibilities of a Secretary General to, the fact that there is an actual path to get there.
And I think what's key is those skills. Strategic thinking, cultural intelligence, that emotional intelligence we were talking about, that's not just for the world stage. That's for any field where you want to make a difference. It's true. You don't need a fancy title to have a global impact.
Yeah.
But it does take that a willingness to learn, to be adaptable. And hey, if you want to leg up, RoleCatcher is a great place to start. Check our show notes for a link to their platform. Who knows, maybe this deep dive sparked something for you. Whatever path you choose, keep learning, keep growing, and as always, thanks for diving in with us.